Hello, this is Amin, and you are watching session 60 of ASP.NET Core MVC tutorial. In this session, I'm going to continue our discussion regarding identity and authentication and authorization. And in this session, we are going to show you how you can create a new user with ASP.NET Core Identity. For this purpose, first we create a view model which has email, password, and confirm password, same as the regular registration form that you should enter your password and also enter your email to create one user for yourself in different web application and websites. And then we are going to create one controller for user management purposes, and we call it user management. And when we create a controller, it automatically has a action method which is index, but we don't need index, and that's why we create one HTTP get action method, which we call it CreateUser, and its result is iActionResult, and it's return a view. Now we need to create a view for creating user purposes, and this is the code that we need to implement a form for registering a user. It is not a complicated thing, and we are discussing all the individual lines of this view in the previous sessions. If you are not familiar with the code, you can go back to the previous sessions and review the codes, but I will let you know briefly regarding this view and these codes that create a user for us. This view will use create user view model, which we created in the previous slide and we discussed in previous slide. And then we need to inject user management, which is a part of ASP.NET Core Identity. And with user management, we can create and do CRUD operation for users and identity users. You can see I'm using constructor for my controller, user management controller, and then I inject user manager class inside this controller. Then when I'm creating my get HTTP get method for creating user, and also I creating my view, I need HTTP post action method for create user, which process the user registration, and it's working with the database which we connected to this web app. And I will explain the code in detail when I'm going to implement it. And also I need to add this option to the main menu, which is user management or registered user. And let me flip to Visual Studio and implement the code that I have described. This is the project that we have been developed until this session together. And as I explained inside the slides, first I need to create a new controller. I'm going to the controller and right click here, and I add a new controller. I'm using MVC controller empty, and I add it, and I call it user management. And then I add the controller. My controller has been created, and as you can see, it has index action method by default. And next, I need to change this action method to create user. and also I decorate it with HTTP GET. Then I need to add a view for this specific action method. That's why I can right click on the view and go to add view option. I select razor view empty and I click on razor view empty and I call it create user. And as you can see, it's automatically create a subfolder under views and it's called it user management. And I have one view here, which its name is create user. But before going to implement this user, I need to create a view model for this purpose. I'm going to view model and add a class here. I call it create user view model. And I just copy and paste the code that I explain inside the slides. And here I need to bring the required namespace. And as I mentioned, I add one property, which we call it email, and its type is email address. And it is required. It means it's mandatory, and user should enter email when the user wants to create a new account. And also, I add two more properties, password and confirm password. Both are required, and their type is password. And I will show you, what is the purpose of adding the password. And if you don't add this uh, data type here, when you type your password, I mean, will be appear to all, and it's not hidden field. And for this purpose, for the password, you need to add this data type password, and also for its confirm. And also I use one validation, which is compare, and I compare confirm password with the password, and if the value wouldn't be the same, this message will be appear and this validation will work. Let me save the changes, and then I'm going back to the create user view. And as I mentioned, this view will use this model, and the model is create user view model. And I'm copy and paste the code that I'm using inside inside this model, and I will explain it. This is the code that I need for this purpose, and I explain it here. I use this one for the title of the page, and I add a form, and the form will refer to user management create action method that I've created recently, and its method is post. And then I'm using some bootstrap classes for make it more stylish. And also I add one label for email and also one input box for email. And I use this span for data validation. Also, I'm using one label and input for password and one label and input for confirm password. And also I add their data validation message here as a span. Then I'm adding a button to submit this form. And also I'm using ASP validation summary to display all the validation errors at the bottom of the form. Also, I'm using these two condition. And as you can see, if I passed a view bag with dynamic value of registered result with word of yes, this div element, which is an alert, will be displayed. And if I pass yes, you can see this message with the alert success. which is a green box. And if something happened that, I mean, the user won't be created, I pass no with this view bag, and this message will be appear. If it is a little bit confusing, don't worry, I will go to the detail and I will show you how these features will work. Then I'm backing to the controller that I have, user management, and here I need to add HTTP post action method, and then I'm creating the same action method, this time for create user, and this create user will receive an object of create a user view model, and I call it create user view model. Then, as I mentioned, I need to inject UserManager class, which is a repository that I can process CRUD operation for users and identity. For this purpose, I use CTOR to create a constructor. And then I need to inject user manager. And here I should add identity user. And I call it user manager. Next, I need to add a property or a read-only field for this injected class, and you can see I can add it by pressing Ctrl period. And here inside the controller, first I'm checking whether model state is valid or not. It means if there is no data validation error, then going to implement the rest of the thing. For this purpose, I'm using if clause, and I'm going to model state. Model state has a method which is valid, and it's return a boolean value. If the model state is valid, it means there is no validation error inside the form. Then I'm creating an object of identity user. I call it user, and it's a new identity. I need to add username, and the username here would be the email that I entered inside the form. Also, it needs email as well. And again, I'm using the email that I have entered inside the form. Next, I need to create this user. For this purpose, I will store a result of create operation inside a object, which I call it result. And as I want to use a synchronous method, which is create async, I should use await here. And as you can see, as long as I add await here, this action method is changed to async, and I use user manager and create async. This method has two overloaded version. I will use this one, which needs an identity user that I created in this line, and also a password. I will add user first, and then I'm using the password that that the user entered inside the form. It automatically hash the password and create the user for me. Then I should check whether the user is created or not. For this purpose, I can use this object, which is a result. This object has one method, which is succeed, and it's return a boolean value if the create operation would be successful, the succeed return true value. And in this step, I want to use these two message box that I have here, and I want to pass this registered result to the view, and that's why I'm using viewback, and I use registered results, but it's better to copy it from here because it's not supporting the IntelliSense, and I will pass yes. It means the form is created successfully. Also, I want to clear the form after registration. That's why I'm using model state dot clear. This method clear the form. Then, if it is not successfully, I want to show a message to the user that convey this message that the user has not been created. Again, I'm using this viewback. And as you can see here, if I pass no with this viewback, this message will be displayed. That's why I set it to no. And also, I want to display the error message, which is related to validation. That's why I'm using for each. This object has errors, which store the errors that happen during the registration and during the creating user. That's why I'm going to add a var. I call it error in result errors, and I want to add all the errors to model state with add model error. The model error would be, it is a key, and I use validation. It could be anything that you want, and then I add error dot description. Also, when you use async, it should be a task which use threads, and I need to add task namespace, which is inside system threading tasks. And now I have created my HTTP post action method as well. Let me save the changes. At the final stage, I need to add this feature to the menu of the web application. That's why I'm going to the view, shared, main layout. And here I don't need this part anymore. I will delete it. And I want to have my main menu at the left side and the menu which is related to the user at the right side. That's why I add one UL here, and here I'm adding one LI, which is the registered user. Registered user will call user management controller and create user action method. And for putting this menu at the right side, I will use the Bootstrap class and add the required Bootstrap class to the menu. Let me save the changes and run the project to see what I have. As you can see, project is up and running and I have registered user at the right side. Let me click on registered user. And the form that I have created is here. If I'm trying to submit the form without any data, you can see I have the validation error, which is related to the email which is required. And when I'm adding the email address and I submit it again, you can see this data validation is disappeared and I have two data validation here, and this is the summary of data validation. I'm using 1, 2, 3, and here I add something else, and I'm trying to submit it, and you can see this time I have the confirm password does not match with the password. I'm going to add 1, 2, 3 for both, and I'm trying to submit this for this user with 1, 2, 3 password. You can see when I'm trying to save it, I have the password complexity error. And here I have internal error. The user has not been created. The alert box that I have created inside my view. And I will discuss about the password complexity and how you can change this password complexity for your web application and for the user. But for now, I'm using a complex password with 6 or more characters, which contain A to Z and alphanumeric and characters. And this time I'm going to create a user with complex password and I save it. And you can see my user has been created successfully. And for confirm this fact, I'm going to SQL Server to check whether my user has been created or not. I'm going to respective database and the table, which is ASP.NET user. And here you can see I have Amin at goldencourses.net as a username, and the password is the same. And the password is a hashed password. And in this session, we discussed about how we can create a user and how we can manage the data validation for CreateUser purposes. Don't forget to follow us on our social media and subscribe our YouTube channel and share your comment with us. We need your support to continue this tutorial series. Once more, thank you for being with us.